First, I want to thank Professor Caraballo this morning for inviting Ana Mile Buendia and myself to join this session. Just to give a quick commercial about career and talent development. My name is Nelly Leon. I am the career coach for the Green School, Stephen J. Green School of International Public Affairs Master's and PhD students. And I'm joined here by Ana Mile. I'll have her introduce herself.
Good morning. My name is Ana Mile Buendia. Feel free to call me Millie, and I am the career coach for undergraduate students in the Green School and alumni.
And we're here just to share with you that we're here as a resource for you. Therefore, if you have any questions about career, excuse me, if you have any questions about your career search, resume review, oh my gosh, sorry, allergies, resumes, CVs, cover letters, interviewing, the job search, how to find jobs, internships, please feel free to reach out to us. I'll go ahead and give the floor to Millie to just give a quick overview of our services as well. Ana Mile? Oh, I think she may have frozen. So I'll go ahead and pick up from where she would go ahead and start. I don't know if she can hear us. Ana Mile? That's okay. So in terms of the services that we provide to the undergraduate and the graduate students and also alumni. So please know that after, once you graduate, you have access to all these services. You can make an appointment with us in Handshake. You can go ahead and have access. For example, today we have an internship fair. We have career fairs. We have employer information sessions, especially with the public administration students. We can bring a lot of employers that are looking to hire you. So we also do mock interviews. We do shadows. We have Panther shadows. If you want to do a one-day shadow with an employer, we have those programs as well. If you want to learn about micro internships, because let's say you work full-time, you have a family, you're caregivers, reach out to us. You can learn more about our information at career.fiu.edu. We'll drop that in the chat. And also you can make sure to activate your Handshake account to find, we have more than, oh my gosh, more than 3,000 jobs and internships posted nationwide. I think there's even more than that. So thank you so much, and please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for stopping by and sharing that information. We'll be having another career development session a little bit later in the semester. But in the meantime, please visit career.fiu and reach out to Nellie and Amelia with any assistance. And without further ado, again, welcome, Ralph. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning to join us. I did post a link to Mr. Rosado, Dr. Rosado's bio in the chat. And as I'll allow him to kind of introduce himself, but as we know, he's certainly serving as the village manager of North Bay Village and is also an adjunct professor at Florida International University and as well as University of Miami, but we won't hold that against you. Welcome again. Thank you so much for joining us.
You got it. Thank you, Professor. I'm really excited to be able to do this. Would it be okay if we went around real quick and just got a sense of, our folks undergrads and what their focus is and all of that, just to get a feel for our audience? Would that be okay?
Yeah, sounds great. Would you like them to indicate in the chat their grade level, or would you want me to create a poll?
I guess there's enough folks I can go around. I'll just go around the screen. So I've got Rosalind.
I am not a student. I work for Miami-Dade County, and I am the president-elect for the American Society for Public Administration, South Florida.
Oh, wonderful. Chapter. Okay, wonderful. Oh, good to meet you. I'm glad you're participating.
Thank
Salome?
you.
Sure.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Rosado. I'm a graduate student and first year. So this is my first semester.
Excellent. And I imagine we have a mix of in-person MPAs, online MPAs, probably some.
Right.
I see two alumni that I know. Laura is one of my EMPA alums, so great to see you.
Yes. It's
Excellent.
good to see you. I'm in the PhD program now.
Oh, wonderful. I didn't know that. That is excellent.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yep. I've finished all my coursework and I'm taking my comp exams this semester.
Oh my goodness. Excellent.
Yep.
Well, very,
See
very
what you
proud
started.
of you as
Thank you.
You got it. Marissa?
Hi,
Hi.
Marissa. I am a second-year graduate student in the MAGA ICJ track.
Excellent. Welcome. Gretel?
Hello, I am an undergraduate student. I'm doing right now the combined program, the BPA and the MPA together. And this is my last semester as an undergraduate student. So.
Excellent. Good. Good for you. Welcome. Charles?
I am a second-year student in the Magna ICJ track.
I've heard wonderful things about that program. Welcome. Roger?
Good morning. First semester student on MPA program in Dr. Caraballo's class.
Good. Very good. I've heard she's a pretty good teacher.
Excellent so far.
Awesome. Good. Julian?
Good morning, everyone. I am a fully online MPA student. This is my second year, and I'm taking currently the certificate for human resources.
Okay, good. Very good. Oh, that will serve you well forever. Such a key field. Excellent. Irina?
Good morning. I graduated the program, the MPA program in 2015, 5 years ago. Wow. And now I work for the town of Surfside.
Oh yeah, I recognize your name. So you're one of our neighboring towns. That is excellent.
Yes, I am.
Yes. Okay, good. Good. Hopefully we'll get together in person in the not too distant future.
Yes,
Good.
let's hope that.
Emphasis on not too distant. Sandro?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm a second-year MPA student. I'm actually in second to last semester in the MPA program, and I'm also doing a certificate in HR.
Very good. Good. Welcome. John?
Yes, I am a sophomore student, majoring in international business, and I wanted before to do like a double major with marketing, but like I decided now to instead just focus on this and then go to law school afterwards.
Okay, good. Well, if you're studying international business, Miami and FIU are the place to be, without a doubt. So.
Yeah, the program is really good. It's among the best ones, yeah.
Good, very good. Rochelle?
Hello, I'm a first year MPA student. I'm in my first semester right now.
Excellent. Welcome. Diana?
Hi, how are you? I'm an undergraduate student. I'm a senior majoring in international relations.
Diana is also one of my former students. I taught for a couple years in the Honors College until recently, and she is an absolute superstar. And one of the assignments we had for that particular program was that everyone had to intern in some sort of public service field. And she wound up securing a wonderful internship with Congresswoman Donna Shalala, who then turned around and hired her full time. So really excited about that.
Thank you so much for everything.
Oh, you got it. Thank you. Let's see. The last two names on my screen I recognize are very familiar to me. Mr. Cernick.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ari. I am a double FIU alum, and now I work at FIU. I've been doing that since I graduated from my bachelor's, but I recently graduated from a master's in global affairs from the MAGA program.
Excellent. Ari, thanks for joining us, and thanks for all you're doing for the school.
No, thank you for being here and for all that you are doing for the school.
I want to do even more if possible. So we'll talk about that. And Alex.
Hi there, good morning. My name is Alex, and I'm an undergraduate student here at FIU. I'm pursuing a bachelor's in political science.
And Alex is one of my neighbors as well, because it's just a small
Yep.
world. Yes. And his parents both work for FIU. So it's a very proud Panther family, and they're wonderful people. So glad you're on here as well, Alex. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you got it. You got it. So folks, what I'd like to do is I find that as I get older and you move up in sort of your career path, I find that I always need to be very linear about everything. And so I created a little matrix of different things that I wanted to make sure I covered just to make the best use of your time. I know your time is very limited, and I'm really honored that you all are participating today. And then Professor Caraballo sent me some questions a couple days ago, which were just, I think, wonderful questions. So thanks to everybody who submitted a question. And what I did is that I combined them sort of like, you know, lessons that I've learned the hard way with answers also to the kinds of things that you all are curious about. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up on the screen. Let's see. So I've got the share screen, and then I've got, I'm trying to remember exactly how I pull up a document. If anybody will remind me, I would deeply appreciate it.
I think you probably should open up, maybe open the document first and then share once it's open. Then you can collect it, select it as the app or the program to share.
Okay, let's see. So I've got the document open on the screen, and then I'm just trying to remember exactly which button to press to actually pull up the page.
Let's see. I think share screen, and then you select the tile with for Word or whatever program you use to create it.
Let me do this. Look, if I can send it to you, if that would be
Yeah,
okay.
sure,
Yeah,
of course.
I'm trying
No
to do the
problem.
share screen, which is what I would be the right thing, but
Not a problem. Feel free to send it to me either through the chat or email it, and I'll upload it. Not a problem.
okay, I'm gonna send it over right now. It's open on my desktop. So let's see. Okay, so we'll get that open in just a second. But I'll give you a little bit of my background. I mean, you all saw my bio. I was born and raised here in the city of Miami to parents who immigrated from Cuba in the 60s. My parents were the first in each of their respective families to immigrate to the US. And they didn't meet in Cuba. They actually met in New Jersey, where my parents got married. And just before I was born, a couple weeks before I was born, they decided to move down to Miami because they said, that's it, we're island people. Why are we living in the snow? Let's get out of here. And they relocated down here. And then everyone else from their families that started to immigrate from Cuba decided to settle here in Miami as well. So I've got a pretty large family. And I'm very proud of my parents for, you know, moving here at a young age. And, you know, it's got to be absolutely terrifying, right? So it's scary to go to college. It's scary to move away, all these things. But imagine moving from another country, not speaking the language and all that, which I think is such a common story to so many of us that are FIU alums and Miami residents in general. I studied in public school, grew up in Little Havana, studied in public school up until essentially until high school. I attended Belen Jesuit Prep in West Dade. And then at that moment we moved over there and I lived in West Dade. Immediately after high school, I actually started at FIU, but this was back in 1990. So I'm obviously dating myself. This month would have been my 30th high school reunion. And of course, due to COVID, it's been postponed. But I have sort of an unconventional story that a lot of people don't know about. So, you know, I actually started FIU in 1990, and then there was a real estate recession in 1991, and my parents are real estate developers. They're retired at this point, but they had a very, very tough time in the early 90s, and their business basically went under at that point. So after my first semester in college, I actually ended up dropping out for almost 2 years. Right? So people who've known me for a long time are like, oh, you're a good student and all of this. And the reality is I was completely confused about what to study. And we had all these financial challenges at home. So I went to work for a couple of years and saved up enough money to go back to school at the end of 1992, and then just worked my way through college. So I think I was, in retrospect, probably not a particularly unusual FIU student in that regard, in that finances forced me to, you know, tighten my bootstraps and really pull it together and pay my way through college. And so I graduated and wound up being sort of this unconventional pattern that added up to 5 years, with my last semester just being one class as I was working, et cetera. While I was in undergrad, though, I will tell you, I took advantage, and it's one of the things I put on here. I really took advantage of everything the school has to offer. So I was very, very pleased to see folks from career services, from SIPA on here. Do speak to them, absolutely speak to them, because they will have so much knowledge and they'll be able to provide you so much guidance that you wouldn't necessarily naturally have. Take advantage of all these resources. So while I was a student and working my way through and everything, I did, squeeze in time to make sure to get involved in a number of things. And at the time, it seemed like, oh, these are interesting things to do at this moment. They probably don't add up to much, right? That's the way I looked at it when I was, 20, 21 years old. The reality is that all those things help you to establish your local network. So I'm very pleased to have gotten an undergraduate degree from what I think is the preeminent Miami institution that is just deeply entrenched in everything that's related to public service. FIU alums are everywhere, helping in all sorts of fields. I'm tremendously proud of the school and the work that it does. It also, as somebody who is, committed to staying in Miami-Dade, it also means that I have just a wonderful network of relationships that I tap into on a daily basis. This is not some sort of fluke. I wouldn't say that as an undergrad, I appreciated that this would be the case 20 something years later, but it's very much the case that I can, if I have an issue with some sort of institution, a policy matter, whatever the case may be, it could be something in the private sector, it could be a nonprofit issue, whatever it is, there's an FIU alum associated with getting it resolved. And that saves you a whole lot of time. So absolutely establish those networks, whether you're an undergrad or a grad student, because they pay off in spades later on in your life. From there, I worked, well, let me tell you how I got my first professional job. I actually thought for sure, and I know somebody had asked about what was it like to be an English major, and what did I think? Well, I was an English major because my entire life I was certain that I would be an attorney professionally. I tend to have, even to this day, I tend to have more attorney friends than any other kinds of friends. It is sort of a field that I probably would have been somewhat comfortable with. But as I spoke to attorneys at the end of my undergrad career, I will tell you that the day-to-day work that they did wasn't something that necessarily seemed like a good fit for me, right? I didn't want to practice law per se. I knew I wanted to give back to the community. And to me, I always made this very strong connection between attorneys and public service, but it wasn't necessarily the precise path that made sense for me. And so at the end of my bachelor's, when I realized, well, I'm not going to be taking the LSAT, I'm not going to go to law school, I had no idea what I was going to do. I really didn't. So at that point, I was still working on campus and sort of trying to guess as to what the next step would be. And what I did, without knowing exactly what kinds of jobs to even look for, what I did is that I put my resume on the Career Services website. And I had one undergrad English class that required us to either write a business plan for a business that we wanted to start, or write some sort of other technical document that could help somebody out. I didn't have an idea for a business, so I said, why don't I write a grant for a nonprofit? At the time, my mom was involved with a nonprofit that helped abused kids. They said they needed some help getting dollars for some programs they wanted to put together. And I said, okay, this sounds interesting enough. And so I wrote a grant application for them that they used to send to different foundations. And they were able to get some money to start an after-school program that helped kids that have been abused. And so I put on my resume grant writing experience, not thinking much of it, just thinking, well, it's a skill, I suppose. I've done, one grant that they were able to reuse, etc. And what ended up happening, and I always think it's somehow, just fortune or fate or whatever. And others have said, no, it was sort of meant to be. The city of Sweetwater, which is located across from the FIU Medik campus, was doing a search for somebody that could be assistant to their mayor / grant writer for the city. And so they went on the Career Services website, they literally put in keyword search grant, and they pulled up all the resumes that had grant writing experience, which I think is a skill that everyone should acquire at some point. So I recommend it no matter what you're going into. And, I know several of you mentioned HR and other things. Whatever the case may be, get some experience writing grants, because what it does is that it forces you to make a case for something that you think will solve an important problem. and that's invaluable for the rest of your career. So in having that on there, they called me and they said, you know, we have this opportunity, would you like to come in? When I went into interview, and I, you know, had not thought anything of it, I didn't know they had a job opening, wasn't sure to even think of looking for that kind of job or looking for a job in local government per se. When I went in for the interview, the person doing the interviews was the finance director for the city, and he was an FIU alum that I'd had a class with a couple years before. Now, he and I didn't know each other, we weren't friends or anything, but he recognized me and I recognized him. And so that already comfort level associated with FIU made a huge difference. Needless to say, I got the job and I worked for the city for a couple years and learned just a tremendous amount, because I was the junior right-hand person to the mayor, and the mayor is, if you know Sweetwater, they don't have a manager form of government, they have a mayor form of government. So the mayor was running everything, and I was, you know, this 23, 24-year-old helping with an assortment of tasks. And that sort of experience at that point gives you a great flavor for the kinds of things you can accomplish in local government. So I, again, visit career services. I've done these little highlights and then I put a lesson to it. It's okay not to know what you want to do. It sounds like you all, from what I hear, you all actually have a better sense than I did at your ages in terms of what to do. You know, I've been involved in student government as an undergrad. I didn't think that somehow I would end up in government, right? I thought it was like a thing that you do that's enjoyable when you're young, but not necessarily that there's a career path out of it. And clearly there was a career path from that. So that's a little bit about my first job. I highlight some lessons there. So yes, having good grades and good test scores and all that is important, but it's really, really important to have practical experience, because at the end of the day, that's what they're hiring you for, more so than the other things that might be on your resume. They're looking at, do you have some of the skills that we are looking for in a potential employee? And the implication of that is, if you don't currently have that, but you have a sense of what you want to do professionally, get your foot in that door. And it may mean, for many folks, it may mean interning, right? So Diana is sort of the perfect example of, started with an internship. A few months later, they said, we have an opening, you're perfect, you're hired. And so, you know, that is just an ideal sort of trajectory for folks to explore. I've gotten lots of questions recently about how COVID affects the workforce, and does it make everything impossible and people shouldn't be near other people, et cetera. The reality is, and maybe you all have realized it, the reality is that many of the things that we work on can be done remotely. So COVID shouldn't be an impediment to getting that internship, because, you know, in the public sector, or certainly in public service more broadly, everybody is looking for talented folks that can communicate well verbally and in writing. And those are things that you can demonstrate from your living room if necessary. So North Bay Village is looking for interns. I'm sure every local government would appreciate interns, every nonprofit, everybody in public service, always looking for good people. If you think there's something out there that would be the right thing in terms of an internship for you, or perhaps that first job or that next job, reach out and offer to do something for them remotely. And if you impress them, you are, you know, you're a superstar in the making, for sure. Other thing that I've sort of weaved in things both professionally and things that I've done as somebody who's been teaching at FIU. This is my 7th year teaching in the Executive Masters of Public Administration program. I've also taught some of the online MPA courses. I tend to be asked to teach a course that revolves around local public policy. And I make it very Miami-Dade centric, since I'm Miami-Dade centric and the students tend to be Miami-Dade centric as well, or Broward centric in some cases. You know, one of the things that I include in whatever I teach, and I taught in the Honors College for 2 years as well. One of the things I typically include in my classes is something that I call a stretch interview. And what it is I encourage folks, or require folks, to think about who they would like to be further down the line. Like, who's had a career that impresses them? Who is somebody that could be a potential mentor? Identify 1 or 2 of those kinds of people and reach out to them and interview them, right? Brush up on their background, their accomplishments, etc. I tell them that the way to get in, and obviously COVID has changed this a little bit. I used to tell folks, what you're asking for is 10 minutes of their time in their office over coffee, right? So COVID has changed this, so it might be remote, but nonetheless, the request is very simple. Email them, sometimes call, but typically email them and say, you know, Mr. or Mrs. such and such, I'm so impressed by your career, how you were able to accomplish A, B, and C at this organization, etc. Drop a few little things to show you've done your homework and say, I think I could learn so much from you. Could I, have the opportunity to meet with you for just 10 minutes over coffee in your office, right? So it's like the ask is not much of an ask. You're not saying, could I take you out to lunch? Could we meet after work? Nothing that sounds like it would be a huge time commitment. I always say, just say 10 minutes over coffee, which they're likely to be having in their office, which means they don't need to even go anywhere to get together with you. And what I'll tell you, what student after student has told me about this over the years is that, if you meet with folks and you've done your homework and you repeat the sorts of things that were important to them to accomplish, and you show that you care about those things too, you will get a lot more than 10 minutes, and you may even get opportunities that come out of it. So when I did this a few years back, I had reached out to Mayor Jimenez, right? I've done this a few times myself, for sure. But one of them was I wanted to meet with Mayor Jimenez, and I said, could I meet with you 10 minutes in your office over coffee at the Government Center? And he said, sure. And then I get a call from his secretary like about an hour before. She said, actually, he wants to step across the building. He wants to get out, get some air. So it'll be coffee at the French place across from the Government Center. I said, sure, that's perfect. Once we're there and we're talking, obviously I had done my homework. He's somebody who had been a city manager for Miami. He had run for office, all these things that I was very much interested in before he became county mayor. It was just like a very interesting career path. And as we're talking and he see that I had done my homework, his secretary called and she said, Ambassador such and such says his flight is delayed. And so you actually have more time. You have an hour and a half, 2 hours before he arrives. So I wound up having a 2-hour lunch with Mayor Jimenez. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen all the time. Nothing like that had ever happened to me either. But the reality is, because I'd done my homework and he's felt comfortable, he decided to stick around. And so we stayed in touch, let's say, and communicated on a number of things, and I'll reach out on county issues and all of that. That doesn't always work out that way, but you'd be surprised. You get more than the 10 minutes. I've also had a number of students who, when they did this, they wound up getting internship opportunities, or the person they met with a few months later would call them and say, hey, we have an opening in my division. Would you be interested? I think you're perfect, etc. So it's worked out really well for folks. So I highly recommend that. And I tell people, interview somebody that scares you as part of this. So not somebody that's already easily accessible, but somebody that it would be a stretch for you to get together with. And you'd be surprised. It comes together more often than you think. I know I was also asked about, interning at the White House during grad school. So after Sweetwater, I was there for a few years. After Sweetwater, I consulted for local governments for several years, and then took a really wonderful opportunity at the city of South Miami. This was 20 years ago at this point, and I absolutely loved my time there. And I was really fortunate because, again, I was sort of right hand to the manager at that city, and so I got to work on a broad range of issues, which is always the kind of work that I like, where it's not predictable, it's not too narrowly focused. I do like to be forced into figuring out how to manage time and how to become sort of instant expert, I call it, where you have just a few days to come up with something, and you've got to just process all this information and come up with a solution. Like right now, one of my commissioners in North Bay Village wants to adopt a policy related to mangroves, getting mangroves planted around the island as a way to combat sea level rise, etc. So I've now had to become like sort of a mini Reader's Digest expert on sea level rise and the potential for mangroves to deter sea level rise. And so that's the kind of thing I've always very much enjoyed professionally, no matter what the actual position is. So when I was in grad school, I wound up going to Princeton, and I focused on domestic public policy. And then when I was there, they had the option of allowing you to add a second, like a joint master's degree in urban planning. I didn't know that much about urban planning before I started the master's program, but as I took classes, I said, I'm absolutely passionate about this. I wish I had stumbled upon this earlier. I probably would have gotten, had I known at the time, I would have gotten at FIU a public administration bachelor's. I just didn't know enough about it until I was already working professionally. But when I was there, they required that everybody between the first and second year of their master's degree intern full-time the entire summer, whether it was paid or unpaid, and they would help you find an internship anywhere in the world, which was kind of amazing. Through a contact that I had from Miami, I was able to get an internship in the White House, but my interests have always been around the housing and neighborhood revitalization field primarily. And so I really wanted to intern at HUD, at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so it was a position, an internship that straddled both. So I was a White House intern assisting the Secretary of HUD come up with this new national initiative where they wanted to send all this information to each of the cities and counties in the country about things that they could adopt locally that would make it easier for people to get that first home or people to be able to afford their rent. So it was basically aimed at reducing local regulations that made it harder for people to afford a desirable place to live. And so I worked on a brochure and a series of things that we mailed. Back then it was mailing, now it would be email, but back then it was mailing to every city and county in the country, which was just a tremendously rewarding experience. Now, what I learned from that, right, a couple things. I absolutely loved living in Washington, D.C. Aside from Miami, the only other place I think I would ever live for an extended period of time is Washington. If you ever get an opportunity to intern there in whatever organization, absolutely take it, because, you know, I'm one of those folks, I actually hadn't traveled very much at all by the time I went to grad school. Went to school with all these people that had been all over the world, and I had been very few places. My perspective was very much this Cuban-American Miami bubble, and didn't realize that other people thought very differently and perceived both, you know, Cubans in Miami and all of these things in a very different way than we do locally. So it was very eye-opening. But it also just showed me, you know, the variety of different perspectives that I've been able to bring back and that I use to approach my work. So I love living in Washington, but one of the key things I learned is that if you're working in the federal government, you feel very detached from the actual outcomes of the things you work on. So if anything, it made me more passionate to go back into local government, where you very much can help people improve the quality of life of their daily lives, right? So this morning they came and they picked up my trash. There was a police officer going in my neighborhood. There's a series of things that very much affect your daily life, and in local government, you get to help those things. You know, we're working on programs at the village to help people get assistance for their businesses and a variety of things that are all very locally rooted. And it's tremendously rewarding because you get to interact directly with the people you're helping. So it's much less, you know, even though you can rely upon theory, and I do constantly, it's much more practical and applied, and you can put a face to an issue, and you can put a face to whatever it is that you're working on and show, I helped, you know, Carmen address this issue with after school care in the age of COVID, because we put this program in place to offer free after school care for parents that are financially challenged in this difficult time. So if anything, it just made me much more passionate about local government. I know we had a series of questions about neighborhood revitalization, which, so typically for FIU, I do a summer seminar for the EMPA program on neighborhood revitalization. And I weave this into just about everything, because this is the stuff that I also happen to read and very much enjoy. So a few challenges and lessons from that. And I define neighborhood revitalization as improving the material well-being of people living in a particular place, right? Improving people's quality of life, and also improving the physical fabric of a place, getting buildings built, getting, you know, things fixed, roads fixed, upgrading infrastructure, etc. So it's very much a people and place-based approach to improving a neighborhood. The biggest challenge, because I was specifically asked about that, I think typically the biggest challenge, surprisingly, is not about money, right? So you always need money to get these things done. I think there's actually very creative ways to finance things through bonds. There are grants out there for many things. There are funders who, if you have a track record, will feel comfortable supporting your initiative, et cetera. So I don't think funding is necessarily the biggest challenge to fixing an issue. If anything, it's getting public and political support to get everyone to agree on one desired course of action, right? I think that actually is often the biggest stumbling block, because people love to throw obstacles in the way. And so one of the things you've got to consider is how to sort of negotiate public and political support for an idea. So one of the things I worked on for the past few years, because before starting in North Bay Village a little over a year and a half ago, I actually ran my own consulting practice for 6 years. but all my clients were governmental, or almost all my clients. Some were nonprofits, but primarily I was consulting for local governments, and I was doing quite a bit of work for Miami-Dade County. And the gist of the bulk of the work is that they have a public housing and community development department, which has received in the past few years funding from US HUD and the federal government to revitalize deteriorated public housing throughout the county, right? So Miami-Dade County has one of the largest stocks of public housing in the US, and there's actual funding now to demolish and replace decrepit public housing with new buildings, using sort of a different theory for how to get this done, which is, you know, public housing used to be for folks that were, you know, very impoverished, and it was relatively homogenous in terms of people's incomes living in public housing. The model that we see now, which has worked much better, is having a mix of incomes, right? So it'll be, when I say public housing, we're talking about housing that serves low-income populations, but that also serves working class folks that are making about the average for the county. So having that demographic range in there, they found is more successful. It's better for crime prevention and a variety of things. And so they basically needed somebody to help them go into these different neighborhoods. And in my case, I went into, it was Little Havana at first, but then also Overtown and Wynwood. And the idea was to convince existing public housing residents that this demolition of their current home was actually going to be a good thing, because new homes would be put in place that were better quality, and where they would have a broader range of folks living there, because they would have, you know, buildings that had more units than in the past. So, you know, this is not easy to convince folks, hey, we're going to demolish your home, but you'll get to come back. We'll relocate you, but it'll only be temporary. You know, historically in the US, this has been very controversial, because folks weren't always guaranteed a place to come back to, and many people were sort of lost along the way. And so getting political support for this and the public buy-in for this was very, very challenging. And so we would have, and this is around 3 complexes in particular, we would have a series of meetings, typically about 8 meetings or so, spread over months. And we would come up with and I use this because even though it sounds like a narrow example, it's actually a pretty good framework for public input in general around initiatives that could be controversial, let's say. So we laid out, what we did is that we laid out a calendar of events when people could come in, and we didn't change the calendar. Here are the dates. It would be weeknights. So you don't want to hold public meetings in the morning or the afternoons. You want to do it in the evenings when folks are more available. Send calendars in advance, mail it to them, go door to door, let them know when the meetings are going to be. Tell them if they have any questions at any time that they can, you know, you have one central contact person to answer their questions. Here's a phone number, give them your cell phone. Here's an email address. We created websites for the project explaining the process, giving as much information as possible. We put every single bit of information we could on the website, and that meant every PowerPoint, every question that we were asked, even if it was over the phone, we'd document the question and then document the answer. I mean, we went like above and beyond to be as transparent as possible. And what that did is it diffused people's natural inclination, understandable natural inclination to be skeptical about government coming into their lives and disrupting their lives. We were definitely going to disrupt their lives. But the idea was to show them that this would actually be a good thing. And we were as specific as possible with coming up with, like, you know, what the process would be, what the renderings of the buildings might be, etc. We created opportunities for people to design their own buildings and to let us know what features, you know, they'd like to see. And we were clear at the beginning saying, we can't necessarily include everything you would like, but let's turn it over to you and you tell us what you would like to see. And people very much appreciated that level of involvement. Now, that being said, this last point I put here as a lesson is very important. We controlled the format of the meetings, and that is a good thing anytime you're going to deal with something controversial. And what I mean by that is we allowed lots of public input, but we established parameters. So it was never anything goes. It was never people screaming. We'd have a microphone. We would go around. You had to raise your hand. We would have people write questions down. We would read them out loud. We would answer them out loud, etc. So we established rules for public participation so that it was never chaotic. It never got ugly. There was never name calling. There was not cursing or anything like that. So coming up with rules for allowing people to engage, but in a respectful, productive manner, you know, ending meetings on time, etc. That's the way to go with those things. I've also been asked on some of the questions how I think COVID is going to impact the development field more broadly. It's interesting. What I'm seeing is that things are moving forward. So certainly if things were already government funded, they typically don't fall apart unless for some reason the funding falls apart, which is pretty unusual. But what we're also seeing in the private sector is real estate is strong in South Florida. So I think there was an assumption earlier in the year, just given the uncertainty, that all projects would come to an end and nobody would move here, et cetera. That has not been the case. And I've actually got some meetings with some real estate folks later this week who are still very bullish, because the reality is if you have an idea for a real estate project right now, it's going to take well over a year to get it started, right? You typically have to design something, which the bigger it is, the longer it takes. You have to pull permits, then you're breaking ground. And depending on what it is you're building, it's usually at least a year for the project to be done. So if somebody right now is thinking, well, we're still, you know, near the apex of the COVID era, the reality is a project is going to take several years to come online. By then, everything should be back to normal. So what I keep hearing is that things are going to move forward. You know, folks may be scared if we're opening something right now, but not if they are building something that's going to take a little bit of time to come to fruition. Yep. All right, so we'll be moving on to, there we go. I also received some questions. Oh, the last point there at the very top is just about the, you know, if we're talking about in general about projects that are office related, I think that market was weak in many parts of the country, or maybe virtually everywhere in the country. And I think it's gotten weaker in the era of COVID. So that I do think is going to slow down. So if anybody was thinking of, let me build an office building, probably not. It's probably something to reconsider, because I think what we've seen, and it's certainly what I've seen with my employees, right? I've got 80 employees, and it's more or less a 50-50 mix of police officers and sanitation workers and others who physically have to be at, you know, in the village to work. And then we have a good number of other folks that run our post office, they run our communications, our human resources person, finance, et cetera. I have you know, about half the workforce that I have in the village, and I think this is typical in local government, are people that really could work from anywhere. So, you know, when we shut down the village on November 13th or so, I sent as many people home as possible that weren't, you know, I think everybody's an essential worker, but some people can work remotely. And what I found is we had very few hiccups. So we started having department head meetings via Zoom, et cetera. And people, if anything, they worked harder, right? I don't know if anybody dealt with this where they thought like, oh, if people are working from home, they're just watching TV. That is so not the case. If anything, folks became more productive because we removed their need to commute every single day. And I found that folks were using that time to do additional work rather than drive an hour and a half a day, for example. So I think how we deal with offices is going to continue to shift, where fewer office buildings, fewer offices, smaller offices, shared space, and probably more folks working from home and coming into the office occasionally. I think that's the future. I had a question about gentrification, and so I include this typically in the neighborhood revitalization course at the department director's request, because it is something. So my thoughts broadly on gentrification, I want to make sure we leave some time for questions, and I realize we're pushing it a little bit, are that yes, it's always a concern, but I think there's actually less displacement. It's been documented pretty well. There's actually a lot less displacement than of people losing their homes because of rent increases, et cetera, than is assumed necessarily. In many cases, including Miami-Dade, what we're talking about often is building somewhere where there's not already housing in place. So it isn't kicking people out to necessarily replace them with new housing. It's often the case in Overtown, Alapata, a number of places, Liberty City, where we've seen some interesting development in the last couple of decades, that you're building something where something didn't exist already. And many residents are actually glad that there's new development taking place, because it tends to mean that they get more services, right? There's now a Publix in Overtown, for example. That wasn't the case in the past, and folks were, you know, eager to have that. So I don't want to minimize it, but it's often not the case that gentrification is leading to displacement and pushing people out. And there are strategies to deal with it, which I won't go into detail, but there is a whole sort of notion of strategies called development without displacement. And that includes things like, if you're building a project, require that a certain number or a certain percentage of folks that work on it or that work in the retail units that are created, et cetera, are from the local community, as well as inclusionary zoning practices, which are when you include units affordable to people in the neighborhood when you build a residential building, for example. I've been asked about skills to become a manager. So obviously I talked about education, which is important. I talked about the value of networks. I deal with many FIU alums, folks that I've known from college, students, et cetera, as part of my daily work. I have a former student in Commissioner Sally Heyman's office. She's our county commissioner. So I talk to one of my former students every week on a range of issues. So having those networks is important. But I think one of the most important skills is actually that I'm a parent, because it teaches you patience and how to negotiate with difficult personalities. And that's something I deal with virtually every single day. I think parenting may actually be the best experience for becoming a manager. Yes. Differences between public and private sector. So I've got experience in both. Much of my private sector experience was focused on public sector work, but nonetheless, you do have fewer constraints in the private sector, right? It's very different in that regard. So I think I take a little bit of this, we're in a hurry to get things done, time is money sort of mentality to the public work that I do. I don't think I ever want to lose that, even though I realize sometimes bureaucracy is a good thing, because you want that those extra layers of review before something goes out to the public so that fewer mistakes are made. So it's essentially about finding that balancing act. I was asked why public service. I think I've probably covered this implicitly, which is that I care more about, I'm more mission oriented than profit oriented, right? I like to get things done that help people and improve their lives. And that drives me much more so than getting rich, for example, right? So I think everybody on this screen is probably thinks that same way, whether you've used that terminology, that precise terminology or not. It's probably what drives us is we like helping people and getting stuff done that makes their lives better. So to me, that's an easy one. And then finally, I was asked what's next. I don't know. As you move up in these sort of government careers, you tend to be in positions that don't have major longevity, right? So if you're middle management, you could probably be middle management forever. And the folks I dealt with, for example, at US HUD had been there, many of them for many presidential administrations, but the top positions were always the ones that come and go depending on who's president, who's in Congress, et cetera, because you're tied to those folks, right? I'm tied to the folks that are on my commission right now. If my commission changes, they may want somebody else. So you don't necessarily have a guarantee to be here forever. And being a manager is not a job that folks have for typically more than 3 years. So you always have to be thinking of what is a logical next step. I'm very happy with where I am. Nonetheless, I need to, like anybody, I guess I need to be open to having conversations if someone has something that's even better down the road. So that's sort of where I am in my career path. And thank you for hearing me out, and I'm happy to answer your questions. And
No,
good to
that's
see
great.
Linda
A
on this
lot
call
of
as
great
well.
food for thought and great advice. If anyone has a question, either if they want to either type it in the chat or raise their hand, and we'll be happy to unmute you to ask.
So somebody asked, how do I handle stress? That is a phenomenal question. This is something I've been thinking about a lot for a couple months.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. This is a really stressful position. And what I find is that the work itself, and I work about 70 hours a week. I mean, there's no way around this. I could tell you I work, less than that, but that it would just be a lie. And every time I think, oh, things will slow down, they don't really. We just went through like all cities in September. You put together your budget. That was really intense. We worked on it every weekend, 4 weekends in a row to make a number of changes, et cetera. Okay, now we're done with it. We don't slow down that much because now we have to implement a series of projects. So this is being a manager wherever, and this is not exclusive to North Bay Village by any stretch. And I don't think it matters whether it's a small city or a big city, just from talking to my peers. It's very demanding of your time. It is very demanding. So it's become more and more important as I get a little bit older to work, to incorporate exercise into my daily routine, like schedule it in and not skip it, because it's very easy to give stuff up. So I make sure to get out of the my office. I've been working out with a trainer. I'm trying to watch what I eat, though I'm not always the greatest about that. I step away to just kind of clear my head and talk to no one, because my phone rings all the time. It's the nature of the job, and it isn't necessarily just my employees, although yes, them too. It's if you work with elected officials, they're very needy of your time and your attention. And I talk to them 7 days a week. I talk to at least one of my elected officials. It's the nature of the job. So incorporating things, meditation, exercise, all those good things, and not forgetting about your family, trying to be as good about that as possible, which is a constant struggle. And I hate the phrase work-life balance, because I still haven't, it's like I'm never going to figure out what that even means, quite frankly. This is it's going to sound very sad, but I'm going to be very ultra candid here. We stayed in on Saturday night, right? I mean, during COVID, everybody's been staying home more. We stayed in on Saturday, and I was extremely happy because I spent time sorting my emails and responding to a ton of things, because I just needed that to feel caught up. I felt really behind because of the budget cycle, which just ended. I felt really, really behind. And when I feel behind, I feel like I'm not in control of my life. And so I said, you know what? I know it's Saturday night, but I'm going to spend time to doing this. And to be respectful to my employees, because I am known for responding to things at weird times and on the weekends and all that, I said, I need to stop that. I need to let them have work-life balance, right? Even if for me, it'll be a challenge. And so what I've started to do just in the last few days is program when my emails will be arriving in people's inboxes. So I may have answered on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning or a Sunday afternoon, but they all landed on Monday after 9 a.m. to be respectful of others. Because when I write to people, they all write back, and I'm thinking, why am I disrupting everybody else's life? So I highly recommend that practice, to give yourself and others that kind of breathing room. I'm not going to spend all my Saturday nights answering emails, I swear, but I needed to do that. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because again, work-life balance, especially in this day and age, whether it actually exists. But I think, it's important that you mentioned that people have to find what works best for them. And even, I was even saying, without the commute in and the commute home, having the wind up and the wind down, I think it's important that we all, take the time to, again, even though we're very passionate about what we're doing, to make sure that we do what's best for our health and, for our own sanity as well.
Setting boundaries, setting your own boundaries, setting boundaries for others. There's one thing I've not implemented, which other managers have said do this, which is don't respond to anyone on Sunday. Just don't. Whatever, unless it's an emergency, don't respond. And if it's an emergency, they should call 911, or you should route the call to 911, etc. I'm not quite there yet. Maybe I'll be there at some point. But
we're getting it. We're all figuring it out as we go along, right?
Yeah.
I think we maybe have time for one more question. And I see Laura posted in the chat.
Yeah, so Laura asked why I left my company. I actually very much enjoyed being, owning my own business. I didn't totally shut it down. I sort of transferred it to my wife, and I don't have any projects, but I didn't want to close it per se. And that's just an option that I could have in the future. They called me. They did call me. I knew two of the folks that were elected in North Bay Village. So they had elections in November 2018. They weren't happy with their manager, and so in February they called me and they said, this isn't working out with the person that's here. Would you be interested in the position? And I said, and if you all have done your homework on the history of North Bay Village and the Miami Herald, they've had scandals over the years. There's a long history of corruption and mismanagement. I'm not saying anything out of place, really. It's things that folks know. And so, one of the reasons I took the position is because I realized there'd be so much to clean up. And that has been the case. We basically revamped every department, the way that they operate. I've hired a number of people. I had several people leave, retirement, etc. And so I was able to replace a number of folks. I had some, characters that weren't necessarily the greatest, etc. And so we've changed just about everything in terms of how we run the village. So I took it because I thought that was such an exciting challenge, and it's proven to be that and more so. I didn't necessarily expect the level of intensity for everything all the time, but I've got a very young commission. 4 out of the 5 are in their 30s or early 40s. And so they want to get everything done. They want to have no ties to the way that things were done for a number of years. And it's like a clean slate almost. So this year, we started the year with 2 parks, and now we have 4. You know, things like that, where in the matter of like 3 months, I suddenly have added 2 new parks. And I could go on and on. We're changing our whole zoning code to try to generate development. You know, we're 3 islands on the water, as you saw in the little graphic, but as you can see in the image behind me, but we actually have a lot of vacant waterfront land, and vacant waterfront land is valuable. So essentially the politics were scaring people away from building in North Bay Village for a long time. So we still have sort of prime real estate. We're trying to change the rules of what can be built where to make it so that we attract more investors and get stuff done. And if you do that, you're able to lower taxes for everybody else, right? So it's like a win-win if we're able to do this right. So those are the kinds of things I've gotten to work on, which are tremendously exciting, and stay tuned. Now when North Bay Village is in the newspaper, it's for good things. So that's exciting.
That's very exciting. And that's wonderful to be a catalyst of, you know, that change there. And I really applaud everything that you are doing in that community. I hope everyone will join me in a virtual round of applause using the reactions. Thank you so much again for sharing your time and expertise with us. And again, really look forward to an opportunity to hopefully continue working with us. FIU's ICMA at FIU is launching a mentoring program. So definitely I encourage you, as you know, Manager Rosado said, reach out to those communities, seek out internship opportunities. Don't necessarily wait for them to be posted. Do your research and, you know, just put yourself out there.
Excellent.
Thanks
Well,
again,
thank you all.
and we really appreciate it.
You got it. Thank you all for participating. This was, I was very flattered to be invited.
Fantastic. Thanks again. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care and stay safe. And again, hope to see you again at the next leadership lecture.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.